to the web of the SOA maturity assessment using OSIMM. OSIMM is the Open Service Integration Maturity Model. It's an open standard that's available in both PDF form from the Open Group Bookstore and in HTML form from the Open Group SOA page. Today will be Andras Zako, IBM Distinguished Engineer and Chief Architect of IBM's Federal Software Business Unit. Andras is also an Open Group Distinguished Certified IT Architect, an IBM Certified SOA Solution Designer, and a Certified Secure Software Lifecycle Professional. His responsibilities at IBM include developing e-government software architectures using the middleware and leading the IBM U.S. Federal Software IT Architect team. Andras is the driving force behind IBM's adoption of the federal government IT standards and is a member of the IBM Software Group Government Strategy Standards team. He's responsible for helping the federal government move e-government into an on-demand era through the application of SOA and cloud computing. He's a member of the Security Architecture Board and Secure Development and Cyber Security. So as an expert with SOA, he's also an expert in security. He represents IBM on the board of directors of the Open Group and currently holds the chair of the IT Architect Profession Certification Standard within the Open Group. He leads the OSIMM standardization work group and resulted in the OSIMM standard in August of 2008. And he's currently working with Heather Krieger, myself, and others to have OSIMM approved as an ISO standard. So just before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. So first, please feel free to submit questions in either the chat or the Q&A facility on the WebEx Event Center. We'll take questions during the presentation via chat, or for questions, we'll save the questions to the end of the presentation. This recording, you can access it online after the event.
Must be my cue to start then. Well, thank you very much for that incredible introduction. This is Andras Zako again, and we're here today to talk about the OSIMM standard, which stands for the Open Group SOA Maturity Model standard. It is actually not your traditional standard as in APIs. This is a technique, and we're going to kind of walk you through the value as a practitioner of and applying that technique. So there are actually multiple tutorials. Some are already online for your use. We're going to actually be talking about this OSIMM, but in the past we've done the impact of SOA on business. I think Heather is one of the folks that contributed to that. Governance, architecting SOA, and developing SOA using TOGAF, the Open Group Architecture Framework, and implementing SOA. So if you're interested in those, by all means, download them and use them. We're going to essentially focus on four major areas. We're going to do an overview of OSIMM. We're going to use our DD or Dursley drill bit company use case and case study to review how we might, as practitioners, apply OSIMM. And we'll use industry standards as a method to foment discussion and come up with some conclusions and hopefully take some of your questions. OSIMM. OSIMM is essentially has three different major facets or elements to it. It's a service integration maturity model. It helps us understand how we can more effectively integrate SOA services, and we are talking about cloud computing these days, so cloud computing as well, in a fashion that helps transform our business. It's also an extensible maturity framework. So it's not static. It's meant to actually be modified and used in the context of the organization looking to transform. And in that context, provides a process for the maturity assessment. OSIMM helps define a roadmap for transforming your business. It defines an incremental approach to taking services and adopting those SOA services, SOA services or cloud computing services in the context of a business transformation, right? So we don't simply take technology and apply it willy-nilly, right? We always do this as effective architects and practitioners in the context of the business problem, in the context of business transformation. So it allows us to understand how we would approach the implementation of both business process and technology as it exists today, and how it must be implemented in order to achieve our goal or strategy. And it does this in the context of multiple dimensions. So the application dimension we're all very familiar with. How we actually are going to approach the implementation of these services, whether they be true SOA, internal services, or cloud services. What are the governance mechanisms? What are the methods that we might apply? How do we manage information in this context? What are the implications to operations? Different dimensions have to be considered as we move from our current state to a future state of both IT implementation and operations, as well as the business processes that sit on top of our IT infrastructure. And our strategy, our goals, our priorities and imperatives help inform the transformation process. Priorities, I'm talking about business priorities and strategy. When I'm talking about imperatives, I'm really talking about those requirements to implement applications in a certain way that your organization or government or entity that's using this might have defined as part of their architecture. Let's make sure all right, okay. So this is the OSIMM maturity matrix. At the top of the OSIMM model, we have the maturity matrix. It's a 7x7 matrix which defines maturity levels and the dimensions. So we're interested in these different dimensions that I mentioned before that are important as we transform our business and technology infrastructure to go through the maturity process to adopt the different technologies and business approaches that are necessary for us to meet a certain set of objectives. So some dimensions are, as you see in the vertical on the left-hand side, are the business view. So what are our business objectives? So what are business processes? Are we governing this transformation process? What is our organization like? How are we organized and how should we be organized in order to actually achieve this transformation? Do we utilize it? This is not only about technology methods. This is not just about design methodology. This is about how we actually approach the end-to-end business to IT transformation, right? So there are multiple methods that may be at play here. The applications constructed. How do we approach the implementation of the architecture, right? Information is very important. So the structure of information, the governance of information, how we actually have our master data models established as we move to a distributed service-based infrastructure is very important. And how we manage that, secure that, and operationalize the service infrastructure is also quite important. Now, across the horizontal, you see that we have different levels, level 1 through 7. So name these levels. We use the names interchangeably. Level 1, we have silo. Level 2, it's integrated. Level 3 is componentized. 4 is services. 5 is composite services. 6 is virtualized services, and level 7 is, well, it's nirvana, right? Now it's dynamically reconfigurable services, which is a mouthful for basically the ability to have your services dynamically change as business dynamics change, right? So your infrastructure makes changes as the surrounding business environment changes. Which is, to some of us, maybe nirvana. It really is the goal of cloud computing and service-based implementations. If we look at a few other elements of this model, we see that we have this piece that's sort of orange called the service foundation levels. And the levels that are necessary to achieve what we call pure SOA services. And we actually did kind of consider leaving that out of the model, but then we were leaving behind some really important background information and experience and expertise, in so much as that we have to transform most of our applications, even if they're service-based, from this SOA point of view. Because if you're doing an M&A, if you're a new company, you often find that maybe a line of business created a capability of some sort, they operationalized it, and it's really very siloed. It can be siloed with respect to the information it uses and shares. It can be siloed with respect to how many services it can interoperate, the platform, so on and so forth. So it's really important to realize that siloed applications are not simply going to go away because we move to a service-based infrastructure. And how to actually integrate those is important, and then componentize those and break those down into consumable pieces which we can use as services is also very relevant to the implementation of SOA and cloud computing. An example here of what we call level 5 architecture domain, of the level 5 architecture domain and their attributes. Also going to use the evolving open group reference architecture to help define this maturity. So some fundamental attributes of composite services, or level 5. Now we've already achieved service enablement, right? So we're one level above that. Fundamental attributes of composite services are that we're using some sort of registry and repository to enable the management, the government, the reuse, the visibility of services themselves. And basing the implementation of our services on some sort of business process language, right? We can define business process above and beyond simply the service components themselves. We probably are going to do this with some sort of enterprise service bus, and going to need an enterprise service bus for integration, transformation, routing, and all sorts of other services that are part of an enterprise service bus. We're very focused, as I said before, in adopt some sort of business process modeling capability. We have to be able to model our business processes. We have to adopt the standards which define those models, and we need to be able to monitor them in situ, in real time. We also believe that there are some common security services that you're going to need in order to actually truly be service-based, especially in this day and age when we're all worried about cybersecurity. And in each element of the model, we also have evolving attributes. That attributes which you will need to achieve, or should be looking to achieve, in order to meet the next maturity level. And in this particular case, it's master data management. We're working hard at level 5 to integrate our data in a way that it gives us a single view. You have to integrate all the repositories to do that? No. You implement a master data management service. There's operational virtualization which is occurring across the infrastructure. Also, looking to achieve business process monitoring and management. We can actually change our services, or at least perceive the necessary changes, effectively monitoring our business processes. And as we go to a service-based or cloud infrastructure, one of the most important elements of operationalizing your implementation is the ability to understand the implications of use as well as debugging. Now, when we've distributed components working, actually dislocated from your current environment, you have a business process that's running in a partner infrastructure, and you don't have authority over it, and maybe even the visibility you'd like to have, you actually must implement in your environment business process management more effectively so you can understand maybe where exceptions occur. Without that, you will never achieve level 6 or 7. Of course, have an evolving need for integrated identity management, those security services that are necessary to be able to manage identity across an end-to-end business process, whether those business processes are directly owned and operated by your organization or not. And in those cases, that's probably even more important. And there must have some sort of established security policy management in place too. Now, if you look down at the lower left-hand part of this chart, you see that this is our SOA reference architecture, and this is part of the original paper that we published in the open group on this particular subject. And we're hoping to actually finish the standardization of the RF soon. We're going to use that and to extend OSIMM later on. Now, the majority of what you're seeing here at level 5 is occurring in this business process layer here in the reference architecture. So you can see in the business process layer that you have composite capabilities. You're beginning to see the development of business processes across the different services. So you're managing the different services as processes themselves. So stay tuned on the reference architecture. I know Heather is looking for that one to close here soon. Let's talk a bit about a case study, because we're here to talk about how, as practitioners, we're going to apply OSIMM. If you've done any reviewing of these particular seminars, you know that we have a case study that we use called DDB Group Case Study, which stands for the Dursley Drill Bit Group. The Dursley Drill Bit Group is a company that manufactures manufacturing components. So drill bits, cutters, all sorts of new widgets or widgets in general necessary for manufacturing. And that is, they've even gotten into robotics later on downstream. They're a long-lived company. They were formed in 1882. They had success because they basically provided the best quality products. They were a patented product line. They protected those products and those patents effectively. And I would say that probably they became very successful mostly because they had such quality, high-end customer service. And they've moved beyond Europe to grow globally, and they've implemented this growth through acquisitions and semi-autonomous operational implementations. But things are changing here at DDB. Their editors are biting at their ankles, and they need a united front to the customer. They have to establish this global branding and got to look more like one company instead of a bunch of segmented businesses. This reminds you of somebody? Need to reduce their administrative overhead in this environment, and they need to preserve specialist production processes and rationalize their post-production processes. So you really want to be able to do on-demand manufacturing. And on-demand manufacturing means that they have to have a view into their business partners' environments, and there has to be direct integration with those business partners and customers so they can actually obtain orders for parts in real time, manufacture them, provide them as needed instead of holding an inventory, which It's evolving quickly, and holding any inventory on the shelf is a liability because liable to be out of use, or less valuable as we move in the future as their business partners' products evolve. They produce high-end drill bits, like I said. They're a preferred supplier to major machine manufacturers, so on and so forth. I caught you up on all of those facets. I'm sorry. So, what's most important here is that DDB must participate in a global manufacturing value chain and partnerships. They have to stay competitive, grow their business in emerging markets, and embrace industry standards. Almost underneath their feet, the industry has been collaborating and coming up with new standards so they can integrate across the value chain effectively. And that you've got all sorts of changes that are now putting pressure on DDB sales and revenue. So this is our top-level chart for DDB, and this shows that they have their traditional ordering mechanisms. They have order management components. They have a production management capability connected to each of their production facilities that are aligned with dispatch management and one-off integrations with online ordering. It's not particularly well integrated. It's basically you got a graphic, you put one of these in, and so it's not integrated with their business partner supply chain. Financial control is also an issue, as well as group dispatch management. I want to make some significant changes here, right? And B looked around and they said, well, what are these evolving industry standards that we can leverage? And was that there was a group called MIMOSA. MIMOSA is an alliance of operations and maintenance solution providers and companies who are focused on developing this capabilities that allow you to have an integrated supply chain manufacturing process. So all the way from build to deliver, and find the different additions and XML specifications necessary for the industry. They also have implemented what they call an integration architecture. We'll see. So, finding MIMOSA, they said that this is a perfect opportunity for us to become aligned with MIMOSA and implement OSA EAI, which is the Open Systems Architecture for Enterprise Application Integration. And they believe that this is a way that they can actually advance transformation using these industry standards in a way that's going to be game-changing. That's all and good, but they had to have some sort of reference architecture against which to implement their transformation. And what they found was that Capgemini and IBM had come up with a Mesa Manufacturing Industry SOA reference architecture. And really found that the reference architecture and the requirements and the steps were laid out, and the actual consulting there, maybe that was behind it, was something that they resonated with their business leaders, and it made it clear as to how they actually might be able to transform. They also knew they had lots of work to do across their organizations to make this transformation necessary, and they knew it had to become stepwise, otherwise they were going to fail. Step and evolutionary. This is not an imaginary case study. There really is a paper out there that Capgemini and IBM led, which speaks to the implementation of SOA using the Mesa standards. You can look it up at that link, hopefully. Strategic direction is we really need to focus on this group dispatch management solution. The business process, services, and infrastructure that they'll make up that solution. We have to form a solution platform, a services platform It can also support other solutions such as order management and production management as the industry moves to these open standards. So they're going to embrace Mesa. They're going to actually use the IBM Capgemini reference architecture. How are you going to achieve that? Adopts OSIMM. We're going to actually do an OSIMM assessment on DB, and we're going to use that as a method to help bring together a line of business stakeholders with our IT stakeholders to ensure they understand what is necessary for them to transform their business. The map I came up with, this is not actually part of the original OSIMM specification, but it is in this presentation. Use it as you see necessary. We decided we needed some way to visualize how these pieces and parts of the assessment and OSIMM fit together. So you look on one end, the left end, EA and SOA strategy. So we defined our enterprise architecture and SOA strategy, and you have to have an enterprise architecture or some sort of business transformation strategy as the starting point for doing any OSIMM assessment. If you don't have some sort of visionary transformation objective in mind, or if you don't have an enterprise architecture which defines all of the pieces of your organization, how they fit together, you're going to have a hard time adopting OSIMM. Now, on the right-hand side, what we have is essentially the model itself, the OSIMM model, and the maturity indicators and the indicators that we use and will modify as we move forward. Now, the assessor collaborates with the organization, which determines the enterprise architecture and SOA strategy, and informs the target SOA maturity model. What our SOA strategy and our enterprise, the SOA strategy and the enterprise architecture constitute our SOA target, our target SOA maturity. This input into the assessment report. Answer is responsible for customizing the maturity model, the maturity indicators, and the current and determines the current SOA maturity, and is that as input into the assessment report as well. Eventually, we're able to describe a SOA roadmap for implementation and adoption. A little bit about maturity indicators and attributes. In the model itself, you have many different indicators. They're like guideposts that help you understand by level what elements of maturity are necessary for us to achieve that particular level of SOA maturity for that dimension, right? So in this case, we have, I'm showing here maturity indicators for the business dimension, and componentized or level 3 business maturity indicator is in the model formal definition and documentation of the organization's business drivers and processes. Now, for each maturity indicator or guidepost, right, you have a set of attributes. A set of attributes allow you to make a decision about or determine the maturity level within that dimension. So, in the case of this particular example, there are cross-organizational maturity attributes, right, at level 3 componentized. And it says some formal enterprise architecture constructs exist, and the organization's business drivers are documented as cross-organizational business objectives. What that means to Dursley or to your organization is part of the customization of the model, right? Maturity indicator is a service capability of the business or IT organization. It's associated with a specific service maturity dimension, and it's the focus of the assessment. Now, and again, the attribute is an observed characteristic of the maturity indicator, and the attributes are observed capabilities of the target assessment organization, which, by the way, you customize, and we'll go through that. Within the OSIMM model, there is a set of assessment questions that help drive us to determine which attributes of the maturity indicators are most appropriate or aligned to our specific organization from as-is view. Right? And that also helps us guide the decision as to how we're going to construct a roadmap for the 2B as well. So in a particular case, the business dimension or the assessment questions are listed here. Some of them are what are the major business drivers for this initiative? It goes on down to what are the metrics for return on investment, so on and so forth. And additionally open-ended, because if you get down to a yes or no question, when you're working with your stakeholders and you're going to bring everybody together, you're going to bring everybody together in the assessment process, right? In the organization, the business stakeholders, the technology stakeholders, the operation department, the programmers, and ask them these questions in order to gain as much information as possible. Take a recommendation about the current maturity level and where you believe they and the roadmap that can help them achieve their desired vision. So, it's important that if you do customize the model, that you don't customize it in such a way that you ask assessment questions that are yes or no answers, right? That may help to a certain degree, but a yes or no question doesn't drive a discussion which will help uncover some of the underlying challenges for implementing a particular service. Here we have the method dimension, and you can see the maturity indicator at service or level 5, which is service-oriented modeling. Maturity attributes of this particular indicator, which is the formal use of a SOA architectural design, construction, and methodology for the implementation of services is utilized, right? Some of the maturity indicators to lead us to believe that we are at maturity level 5 would be a formal and recognized methodology for the creation, development, deployment, management is in practice, right? So we're using the attributes as guideposts themselves to determine the information that we glean as part of the assessment, where on this matrix our organization fits, right? So it's important to customize the framework to reflect the overall services strategy, right? And the maturity indicators are there to focus on alignment of EA vision, industry standards, for example, in this case, MIMOSA and MESA use, internal enterprise architecture standards and techniques, SOA standards in general, and enabling the service location transparency. Our assessment questions, just to review, are intended to identify the SOA maturity attributes of the assessed organization, right, which help us determine what we are currently at. For example, if we wanted to extend the model, in case, for our DDB example, the current base model indicator for the business dimension is a maturity assessment of the OSIMM business. A SOA maturity assessment of the OSIMM business dimension is conducted by identifying the formal definition of the documentation of the organization's business drivers and processes. Now, we extend this by adding standards requirements. Standards adoptions, in this case maybe MESA or OSEAI. And so this may be standards in specific standards that we think are necessary in order for us to achieve technical direction, or industry standards. It could also include, for example, outsourcing services or using cloud computing. Now, in our case, we've decided to modify the business dimension maturity indicator as follows. We've actually put in maturity attributes, new attributes, which lead us to make some particular decisions about what maturity level we're at. Right? And this is necessary for DDB to understand current option and approach across their organizations for the implementation of SOA, and particularly SOA in the context of their industry standards, MESA and OSIMM, and the implementation of the reference model that we talked about earlier. Here, for example, if we look at, let's see, componentized at level 3, the indicator is formal business process definition for implementing remote business flows, right? And we make a distinction about the particular component that we are evaluating, or organization or department, and we say that the cross-organizational behavior would be measured by seeing or verifying and validating that the organizational acceptance of MESA vision is in place, and that the strategic planning is in the process of being conducted. All right, so it's evolving, and the business components are not integrated into the value chain, right? So in this case, ties is not really where we want to be. We certainly want to be probably up near composite services. So as we go up in maturity, or we're in adoption of MIMOSA and MESA standards, we're going to see at level 5 that MIMOSA and our MESA EA is defined in terms of BPM flows, and that the organization, or DDB in this case, our business drivers are elements of the overall global business value chain. So we're actually seeing adoption of this particular implementation of MESA in context of our EA, and we're seeing the adoption across business through the transformation of the value chain. So if at the architecture dimension, the base model maturity indicator was identifying those service components that have been designed and are deploying using formal methods, principles, patterns, frameworks, or techniques. And we're going to extend that in this case by saying that, from a standards point of view, that components are designed using MESA industry best practices, industry SOA reference architecture models that implement the MIMOSA standards. And that from an outsourcing point of view, because we had an outsourcing strategy with respect to our case study, the service components are designed to allow substitution of outsourced services, right? So we don't get basically in a situation where we're only able to implement services that are developed internally. We can actually outsource them. And, the value in the global value chain. So as you see here, and we'll go back. I thought there were little red circles here. We have the architecture dimension in the model that's been updated now with our new maturity indicators and our new maturity attributes, which lead us to determine what SOA maturity level our organization is able to achieve. And if we look at SOA, or level 5, again, maturity indicators, service components are designed into MESA industry best practices and industry SOA reference architecture models that implement the MIMOSA standards. And the integration, and we're seeing this, integrated throughout the enterprise. It's integrated enterprise-wide, and the primary attribute of that we would need to verify would be most systems are using MESA SOA reference architecture based on implementations that have implemented MIMOSA standards for internal interoperability. So, if we were to go through our assessment, or in this case, reassessment of our organization, would find evidence that applications in our business are actually being managed to this particular maturity indicator as defined by the maturity attributes. So, part of this, if we were a practitioner and working with the business, consulting with the business to determine what the maturity ought to be, the to-be state, right, the vision, we've determined that in our case for DDB, we have to be at, we want to be able to achieve dynamically reconfigurable services at the business view or at the business layer, and that we believe, because of our outsourcing model, that internally we really don't need to achieve more than level 5 for internal services, because if we outsource significant sections of our business to other business partners, that will take care of the ability to do dynamic reconfigurable business services. That may not be the assumption that works out, but that's the assumption the business makes here in this particular case. Now, when we did our original OSIMM assessment, we found that the business, that DDB, was at these maturity levels for across the different dimensions, right? So their applications are pretty siloed, and they're using layered architecture and some componentization, but really they're back down at the object-oriented modeling techniques and not really using it in a service-based method. Their operations department, a little bit more mature. Now we can actually define the roadmap, and this is where a little art comes into play. Now we have in the OSIMM document, the value achieved, or the business value of achieving each particular level. But you have to, as a consultant, kind of determine what will be the value of achieving each maturity level with respect to the mission and vision, right? In the case of DDB, we've decided that we're going to have dynamically reconfigurable business processes. And again, our outsourcing strategy is probably going to take that into consideration. Internally, we probably won't be able to get our development and IT team to become, at least initially, more than SOA enabled or level 5, because we got a long way to go here anyway. So we're looking to outsource, initially. Internally, we're going to do a lot of training and infrastructure modernization in order to achieve level 5, and then we're probably going to go through a set of incremental steps of evaluating using OSIMM to determine whether our strategy is working and to determine next steps for may be necessary in order to achieve our vision. So a good point to actually talk about conclusions and then go into a discussion. It's really important to customize OSIMM. You can certainly use the base model. In fact, you want to use the base model actually to gather information and make an initial decision about where in the matrix your organization lies. Remember that we are doing an assessment that it's context sensitive. You're going to be getting information about maturity with respect to the organization or application business mission initiative that you're focused on. You could do enterprise-wide, but you can get an enterprise-wide high-level picture out of that. If you go down to a specific initiative and you really drill down into the groups that are the stakeholders on the business side as well as the IT side, you get a more granular picture. You need to optimize OSIMM to focus on your EA strategy, but also industry standards adoption, internal enterprise standards, implementation of techniques, certain techniques like the implementation of virtualization for implementing cloud computing be one of yours. So standards, alignment of the EA vision, as I've said, and OSIMM assessments can be used to help refine organizations' services strategy and approach. And this is a technique, it's a framework, and it's there for you to modify as necessary. So we probably have some questions on tap. That are still online. So let's see here.
Q&A.
So
we have one really good question that's been generating a lot of traffic on the chat, and what's the relationship between OSIMM and IDLE?
the relationship between OSIMM and ITIL. So ITIL, if I heard that correctly, is a set of best practices and techniques and approaches for implementing your optional infrastructure, mostly, right? And they kind of go hand in hand when we're looking to implement operational best practices as part of your SOA implementation. So I look at the model, at the original matrix, and we'll go right up here to here with Dursley drill bit. ITIL would be one element potentially your organization to consider when defining maturity and loading the model with respect to the infrastructure and management layer. So it may be that you want certain ITIL processes or techniques to be used as across the organization as part of your vision, right? But you know that adopting in a kind of all for nothing strategy is probably not going to be successful. What you can do is actually load the model in an incremental fashion so that as you adopt services and go from the service foundation levels to through services and all the way up to level 7, that you're implementing or you're seeing the implementation, you're actually witnessing the implementation of certain ITIL techniques. So I go hand in hand, actually.
Thank you. That we've had online is, why are base assessment questions open rather than multiple choice?
I thought I went through that. Well, if they were multiple choice, you just kind of get yes or no. And remember, this is a consulting technique, right? And the more information you have, the better you're going to be to make decisions about how you effectively implement your SOA strategy. So, when you're going through this process, and I've gone through quite a few of them using OSIMM, you're going to be working with different stakeholders. Now, let's take the business stakeholders, right? And you might ask these open-ended questions. Can you give me, for example, a document which defines your, strategic vision? Well, you cannot imagine how many customers that I've had that kind of looked at each other like, well, we don't really have a document. I mean, we got a couple of PowerPoints too. Well, yes, Bob, but I mean, we got the whiteboard thing. I mean, so really, when you see that, you know that they haven't sat down and agreed amongst themselves what their business strategy is. So certainly, you wouldn't put them up at level 7 if that's the case, right? And you would also to help you understand, well, they maybe need to define an agreed upon business strategy, and that business strategy's got to define the business process that they plan to implement. And again, you would not believe how many customers or in organizations don't understand the business processes that they plan to actually implement in their IT systems. They haven't really considered it. They know that they have an initiative, they see the end game. They haven't actually thought out the process for implementing the business process. Another one?
Yes, I do. From Simon Finney, is there any experience of CMMI-focused organizations moving into a SOA environment and how they adopt OSIMM?
Well, we believe that, and this has been asked of us before, why didn't you just use CMMI, or why is this another maturity process, and so on and so forth, right? So, found the need to implement OSIMM primarily because we want to scope the definition and process for assessment, right? The definition of SOA and the process of assessing the target organization. And so with CMMI, it's a very broad approach, right? But it's important, and it may be used in context with OSIMM. So you might have SMI being used side by side with OSIMM, a way to determine implementation maturity. When we focus on SOA, quite frankly speaking, there's more to IT and the business than just implementing services. And what we're going to be doing when we focus on an OSIMM assessment on those high-value targets that are going to help achieve our business mission or vision. So we feel that this really helped define or better define the scope in the context of implementing services or cloud computing than really going to a broader model. Another one?
Yes. We've had a question on the time dimension. In turn of an assessment on the time of an organization needs to step from level N to level N plus 1.
So how much time does it take, right? Time is not actually integrated into the SOA assessment process, and not integrated into OSIMM either, really. These are snapshots in time, right? So theoretically, if you did a snapshot day by day, which we know that you're not going to do, right? You would see a continuous migration from one particular maturity level to the next over a long period of time. If you decided to outsource pieces or do a greenfields implementation. It's really dependent upon how you decide to approach your SOA or cloud computing strategy. So time is really dependent upon a bunch of different things, right? So one is your enterprise architecture, your business vision, your techniques that you're applying, and OSIMM is there to help you actually make a decision about where you are from a maturity point of view to determine if you're going in the right direction at a particular point in time. So, I suggest, and it is a good point, that you reassess at very important milestones, right? So you set up this maturity roadmap, and the roadmap is broken down into project attributes and timelines. And that you would actually do additional maturity assessments to determine if you're making progress. I got to be honest with you, OSIMM probably is most valuable to the enterprise architects and the executives who are seeking to oversee the transformation process. On a day-by-day scale, the average developer or IT guy probably isn't going to see a lot of value from OSIMM, because they're making very small incremental adoptions in order to get from one maturity level to the next. It would be a great dashboard tool, right?
Thank you, Arnav. The next question we have is how to determine the best scope. Most companies have different maturity per business unit.
Absolutely. As I said during the presentation, we want to scope this down at a level of granularity which is going to give you some actionable results. So I would say that you take your SOA vision or your cloud computing vision and you go by service, right? And you drill down into each one of those services and do an assessment with respect to the stakeholders that are supporting the implementation of that particular service. So if you did it across your entire enterprise, you not get any actionable results. If you did it by service, then I guarantee you probably would. If you go back to the well and it's the same folks every time that you're assessing, well, an issue too. So you might do, if it's the same individuals you're having to assess, you might want to have an assessment session that focuses on different initiatives, and you break the different roadmaps down by initiatives so that you don't, go back to the well and these stakeholders every single time.
I think we have time for one more question. TOGAF, do they overlap?
Well, TOGAF is, the primary methodology in the open group for addressing enterprise architecture, and it is, worldwide most recognized method. It would be the methodology that you would adopt for implementing your enterprise architecture, and there are kind of hooks down into implementation architecture. So I see this as, OSIMM is absolutely part and parcel of the process you would use to apply in your implementation phase as you go around the crop circle to determine your as-is to be. And so it would inform your strategic vision, it would inform your business architecture, and it would inform your development practices and processes and all that kind of stuff as you move around to deployment at the top of the, when you went from 11 to 2. So I actually think it's a perfect tool to use when implementing TOGAF, especially when it comes to cloud computing and service-based implementations and visions. Yeah, I bet you that some folks are interested in maybe tooling. If I were to, I've had this question before, so since I wasn't asked the question right up front, I'll go into it myself, and that is that, do you see tools to support, or do you yourself use tools as an IBM organization, or do you see customers using tools to help adopt OSIMM? And absolutely we do. We see there are organizations like Capgemini. I know that IBM has a tool. I know SAP has got a SOA assessment tool. All those organizations are certainly approaching modernization in different ways, but we have a SOA, a OSIMM assessment tool we call ART, which is the SOA Assessment and Roadmap tool, and it helps us actually gather all of the information, go through the assessment process, and then effectively visualize the results of OSIMM assessment when we're working with customers. So we're really hoping that other vendors or customers take up the mantle and look to actually operationalize these assessments as well. Heather, anything else?
No, we're out of time for this webinar. Andras, this has been very interesting, and I think the questions that we've had come in have been very insightful and thoughtful as well. So to thank the audience, excellent questions. I'm going to close the webinar now. We will see the recording of this webinar at the Open Group /SOA site. On the site, there's a click for webinars, and this is where we post our recordings. We also have a recording of the governance framework webinar. That's also an Open Group standard. So if you're interested in that one, please go there and look that one up as well. So thank everyone. Anything else?
No, it's great. Fantastic presentation. And yes, please do go look at those recordings. There's quite on that list. So yes, thank you very much, Heather.
Ready. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.